I've been an over-the-road driver for 6 years now, mostly solo, mostly long cross-country hauls. And I want to say up front that I've never had the kind of problem being a woman doing this job that most people assume I'd have. Drivers look out for each other more than people from outside the industry tend to think. This isn't that kind of story. I was running a load from Oregon down to Georgia, split up over about 4 nights, sleeping in the cab at rest areas and truck stops the way you do on a run that long. It was late spring, the kind of run where the weather's still cool enough at night that you actually want the extra blanket in the sleeper. And the first night had gone completely without incident. A quiet stop somewhere in Nevada where I'd slept better than I usually do on the road. Second night out, I was parked at a rest area in Utah, pretty remote, maybe 8 other rigs scattered around the lot, which for that stretch of road is actually a lot of company, so I felt completely fine about it going in. I did my usual routine, walked the perimeter once before settling in, checked my mirrors were angled right, texted a friend back home to say goodnight the way I do most nights on the road, more habit than necessity at this point in my career. I remember the lot being unusually quiet, even for that hour, just the low hum of idling reefer units from a couple of the other trucks, and I fell asleep pretty easily, no different from any other night on that run. Around 2 in the morning I woke up, not from a sound exactly, more from the feeling of the cab shifting slightly, the way it does when someone leans a hand against the outside of it. I lay there in the dark and listened. Nothing at first. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the truck, not running past it, not walking near it on the way to somewhere else across the lot. Circling. I lay still and counted, and they went around the whole rig at least twice before pausing. I told myself it was probably another driver checking their own tires, doing that pre-dawn walk-around some of us do out of habit, or maybe just a walker passing through. People do walk laps around rest areas at night. It's not that unusual on its own. The footsteps stopped for a long stretch after that second lap, long enough that I actually started to drift off again, half convinced I'd exaggerated the whole thing in my head. Then, something tried the driver's side door handle. Just once. A single, deliberate pull. My doors lock automatically the moment the truck's parked. Always have. I never skip that step, so it didn't open. But I heard the handle give that specific metal click it makes when someone tries it and it doesn't budge under their hand. I sat up, very slowly in the sleeper, and didn't say anything. Didn't turn on a light. Didn't move more than I had to. I went through the checklist in my head the way I always do when something feels off. Mirrors set right before bed, doors locked, air horn cord within reach, phone charged and sitting right next to me. Small things, but doing them, naming them to myself, kept me from freezing up completely. About a minute later, I heard the footsteps start again, moving away from the door this time, toward the front of the truck. Then, I heard them stop directly in front of the windshield and go quiet. While I sat there, I ran through the obvious explanations, same as anyone would. A rest area walker who'd had one too many energy drinks and was just pacing off nerves. Maybe. A driver checking his own straps who drifted a little too close to my truck without realizing it. Someone locked out of their own rig, looking for a working door in the dark. Every one of those is a normal thing that happens at rest areas. None of them explained why the pace never changed, why it never called out, why it never knocked to ask if anyone was awake to help. A locked-out driver knocks every time. That's the whole point.
I have good tinted windows, dark ones, and it was pitch black in the cab, so there's no reasonable way anyone standing outside could see clearly in. But I could feel. I don't have a better way to put this. I could feel that whoever was standing there was looking directly at the exact spot in the sleeper where I was sitting. Not scanning the cab in general, fixed, right where I was, like they already knew exactly where to look. At one point, I thought I heard a faint sound against the glass itself, something soft, almost like breath fogging it, though I couldn't be sure over the sound of my own pulse in my ears by that point. I sat like that for what felt like a full 10 minutes, not moving, barely breathing, watching the outline of the windshield for any shift in shadow that would tell me something. Eventually, I heard the footsteps move off toward the far end of the lot, unhurried, the same slow, deliberate pace they'd had the whole time, and I didn't hear them again after that. In the morning, I checked the gravel around my truck before I pulled out. There were footprints, going in a clean, tight loop around the entire rig, and then a second, straighter set that led right up to my driver's door and stopped, and then continued around to the front of the cab and stopped again, right at the spot where I'd felt eyes on me through the glass. No prints leading away from that second stopping spot in any direction I could find, like whoever it was had simply stood there and then wasn't there anymore. I asked around the lot the next morning, keeping it casual. Anybody up walking around last night? That kind of thing. 2 other drivers said they hadn't heard anything at all. One older guy, hauling livestock a few spots down, didn't answer right away, just looked at me for a second too long, and then said I should get moving before the heat came in. I did. I finished the run to Georgia without any further trouble, and I've thought about that Utah stop more times than I can count since. I don't park there anymore if I have any other option on that route, even though it costs me a little extra time some nights finding an alternate stop. I've rerouted through a different rest area about 40 minutes further along instead, even on nights when I'm running behind schedule, because the extra 40 minutes feels like a small price for not thinking about those footprints while I try to sleep. Other drivers I've mentioned it to, carefully, without going into too much detail at first, tend to get quiet for a second before changing the subject, which tells me something, even if none of them have ever said outright what. This one isn't even about me driving. I worked the overnight counter at a truck stop off I-40 for about 1.5 years before I ever got my own CDL and started driving myself. But you see a lot of drivers come through at 3, 4 in the morning, and after enough months you start noticing patterns without even trying to. The stop I worked was one of those big all-night operations. A couple dozen fuel islands, a diner counter that never closed, a driver's lounge with a couple of worn recliners nobody ever seemed to actually sleep in. I worked the overnight shift, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, mostly because it paid $1 more an hour than days, and I was saving for my CDL classes at the time. You get to know the overnight regulars fast in a job like that, faster than you'd think, because there just aren't that many people moving through a desert truck stop at 3 a.m. on any given night. I could usually tell who was pulling in before they even parked, just from the sound of the engine, the way certain rigs idled a little rough or a little smooth, depending on how well they'd been maintained. There was one regular, older guy, drove a red Peterbilt, came through maybe every 10 days on a route I never asked about, because you learn not to ask. Real polite, always got the same order, black coffee and a pack of gum, tipped in exact change every single time, down to the penny. Nothing weird about him at all, which is honestly why what happened later stuck with me so much. One night, he came in and asked, real casual, if anyone else had come through asking about him. I said, no, nobody had, and he just nodded and said, good. Keep it that way, and laughed it off like a joke. I remember he tapped the counter twice with 2 fingers when he said it, a little habit of his I'd noticed before, usually right before he headed back out to his rig. I didn't think much of the whole exchange at the time. Regulars say odd things sometimes, especially the ones who spend that much time alone on the road, and I didn't think about it again until maybe 2 weeks later, when I'd honestly half forgotten he'd said it at all. A different guy came in one night, younger, driving a rig I didn't recognize from the lot's regulars, and asked me, by name, my actual first name, which was on my name tag, sure, but he said it like he already knew me from somewhere, not like he was just reading it off my chest. Whether the red Peterbilt guy had been through recently, something about the way he asked put me on edge before I could even name why. He wasn't looking at me while he talked. He was looking past my shoulder, at the door to the back room where we kept the mop bucket and the extra register drawer. I told him I couldn't give out customer information, which wasn't even a real store policy. I just didn't like the question and wanted an easy way to end it. He said that was fine, bought a coffee he never touched, and sat in the parking lot in his rig for close to 3 hours. Didn't come back in, didn't leave, just sat there, engine off, cab lights off, in a dark lot, for 3 hours. I want to walk through what I actually noticed during those 3 hours, because, at the time, I explained each piece away separately, and it wasn't until later that they stacked up into something I couldn't shrug off. First, he never once got out to stretch, use the restroom, anything, which isn't impossible for a driver on a short break, but it's unusual for someone parked that long. Second, another regular came through around 1 a.m., a guy who fuels there every week without fail. And he mentioned to me at the counter, unprompted, that he didn't recognize the rig sitting out front, and he knows most of the trucks that run this stop.
Third, the plates on it, which I only glanced at because I happened to walk past the window, didn't match any state format I recognized. Not that I'm an expert, but I've worked that counter long enough to know what Texas and Arizona and California plates look like at a glance, and this wasn't any of those. Each one of those things has an easy explanation on its own. New driver on an unfamiliar route, plate style I just didn't recognize, nothing that would have bothered me if I'd noticed just one of them. It was all three together, plus the not moving, plus the question about a man he clearly wasn't supposed to know I knew, that finally made the back of my neck go cold, somewhere around hour 2. Around 4:30, I stepped out back for maybe 90 seconds to take the trash to the dumpster, standard part of my closing routine. And when I came back in and glanced out the front window out of habit, his rig was still there, engine still dark, exactly where it had been all night. Around 5 that morning, I glanced out again, and his rig was simply gone. I hadn't heard it start. I hadn't heard it pull out. That gravel lot out front, you can hear everything on it. Every rig that comes or goes crunches gravel for a solid 10, 15 seconds minimum before it's clear of the lot. I told myself I'd just been distracted with a customer and missed it, even though I knew exactly how long my last customer interaction had taken, and it wasn't long enough to explain the gap. The red Peterbilt guy didn't come through on his usual schedule after that. Not the next week, not the one after. I asked around, other drivers who used the stop regularly, and nobody knew him by name. Most of them just knew him the way I did. Regular, polite, always black coffee. He never came back through that stop again. Not once in the rest of the time I worked there. I quit that job about 4 months later for completely unrelated reasons. Better pay somewhere else. Nothing dramatic about the timing. I never mentioned any of it to my manager at the time, mostly because I couldn't think of a way to phrase it that didn't sound ridiculous out loud. A regular stopped coming in. A stranger asked about him, and then vanished from a gravel lot without a sound. On paper, it's nothing. It's the kind of thing you'd laugh off if somebody told it to you at a barbecue. But I still think about him sometimes, when I'm parked overnight at a stop like that one now, driving my own rig, gum and black coffee, sitting in my own cup holder, some nights without me even planning it that way, and some vehicle I don't recognize is sitting in the lot,
with its lights off, engine off, just sitting there. And I find myself watching it a little longer than I probably need to before I let myself fall asleep. I've been driving trucks for 11 years now, and this one happened back in my second year, though honestly, the years blur together out here, so it might have been my third. I was 26 at the time, still fairly new to solo overnight runs, driving for a mid-sized regional carrier out of Columbus that mostly moved dry goods between distribution centers. I was running a regular overnight route, Ohio into Indiana. Freight I did probably twice a month. Same stretch of I-70 I could have driven with my eyes closed by then. Nothing special about the route at all. Flat, boring, cornfields on both sides for close to 90 miles straight. The kind of drive where the biggest event of the night is usually a deer standing too close to the shoulder. That night started completely ordinary. I'd grabbed a gas station sandwich at my last stop, the kind wrapped in plastic that's been sitting under a heat lamp longer than it should, and I remember eating it one-handed on the highway while half listening to a podcast that had long since lost my attention. Traffic was light. Weather was clear. Nothing about the first 2 hours gave me any reason to think the night would be anything other than routine. I'd gotten into this habit, on the long, boring stretches, of leaving my CB on scan instead of locked to one channel. Just something to fill the cab besides my own thoughts going in circles. Truckers talk about everything on there. Weather, way stations, somebody's kid's birthday, complaints about dispatch, background noise, mostly. The radio equivalent of a TV left on in another room. Around 1 a.m, somewhere past a town so small it didn't even rate its own exit, I picked up a voice on scan that didn't sound like the usual chatter. Slower, real deliberate, like it was choosing each word before it said it. It said, and I remember this exactly because it struck me as such a strange thing for anyone to say to a stranger on a scanner. You're going the right way. Don't turn around. Then nothing. I figured it was some trucker messing with a rookie. That happens. Drivers haze each other on the radio all the time. So I let it go and kept my eyes on the road. Everything was fine for a good while after that. I passed a rest stop, saw a couple other rigs parked for the night, headlights coming the other direction on schedule. All of it perfectly normal. I actually remember feeling a little embarrassed for having clocked that voice at all. Like I'd let one weird sentence spook me for nothing. And I even laughed a little to myself about it. Cranked the podcast back up, settled into the drive the way I would any other night. Then I noticed my fuel gauge. I'd topped off 2 hours earlier, more than enough to make my next stop with margin to spare. But it was reading almost a quarter tank lower than the math said it should be. I told myself,
Gauge malfunction. Trucks are old. Needles drift. It happens more than people think. That was explanation one, and it held up fine on its own. Maybe 20 minutes after that, I glanced at my mirror, and the taillights of the truck I'd been steadily gaining on for the better part of an hour were just gone. Not faded into the distance gone. Gone. Like the road behind me had gone completely dark. No taillights ahead of where they'd been. No headlights coming the other way. Nothing at all in either direction for as far back as I could see. And this is I-70. At that hour, there's still traffic. Not much, but some. I sat with that for a solid minute before I decided it was probably an exit I just hadn't clocked passing. Explanation 2. The third thing is the one I still think about. My CB, which had been sitting on scan the whole drive, had somehow gotten switched over to a single channel. I hadn't touched it.
I don't even reach for that dial while I'm driving. It's mounted in a spot that's genuinely a stretch for me. I have to lean forward and to the right to reach it. Not something I do without noticing myself doing it. It was locked onto channel 19, a real channel. Truckers use it constantly. Except when I tried to raise anyone on it, I got nothing. Not static exactly. It was like the mic was open on the other end, but there was nobody there. And nothing there. Just an open, listening kind of quiet. I ran through the explanations out loud in the cab. Actually said them to myself. Fuel gauges glitch. Cars pull off unnoticed at exits. Somebody could have bumped the CB dial back at the last fuel stop without me seeing. All of it reasonable on its own. That's what you do at 1 a.m, alone on a dark highway. You narrate your own logic so you don't spiral. And for a while, it worked. I want to be clear that I went through each one of those explanations properly, not just brushing past them to feel better. The fuel gauge thing, I actually did the math twice, mileage against tank size, because I know my truck well enough to know roughly what it burns on flat interstate, and even accounting for a generous margin of error, the numbers didn't quite sit right. The missing taillights, I told myself there'd been an exit around there, but I've run that stretch enough times to know there isn't one for another 11 miles, and I only remembered that after I'd already talked myself into believing there was. Small thing, but it needled at me. About that same time I noticed something else. A fourth thing that I hadn't clocked right away because on its own it barely registers as anything. My dome light, the one over the sleeper berth behind my seat, had come on. Not flickering, not glitching, just steadily lit, like someone had reached back and flipped the switch. I hadn't touched it. Nobody was back there. I always check before a night route, force of habit from a trainer who drilled it into me early. I reached back and switched it off without taking my eyes fully off the road. Told myself it was a loose wire, vibration from the road jarring the switch, and kept going. About 10 miles later, I saw brake lights ahead, way ahead, just two small red points sitting in all that dark. I remember thinking, good, there's someone else out here. That's actually a relief. As I got closer, I realized they weren't moving at all. Not slowing down, stopped, dead center in my lane. No hazards flashing. I had to swing wide around it, and in the second and a half my headlights swept across it, I saw it was a truck cab, same make as mine near enough, engine clearly still running by the sound of it, cab light on inside, and the driver's seat was empty. Not the kind of empty where somebody's leaned out of frame reaching for something on the floor. The seat was pushed all the way back on its rails, the way you'd set it for someone a lot taller than the average driver, or for nobody at all. The whole scene lasted maybe 2 seconds in my headlights, but I noticed things in that short window that I still can't fully explain. The driver's door was shut, not hanging open the way you'd expect if someone had climbed out in a hurry, and the mirror on that side was angled down toward the ground, directly below the door, not set for driving at all. I didn't stop. I know how that sounds, given the job, given what we're all supposed to do for a fellow driver in trouble on a dark highway. I've replayed that decision more times than I'd like to admit since. I called it in anonymously from the next town over, gave dispatch the mile marker off my log, and kept driving. I finished that route that night, delivered on time, clocked out, went home, and didn't sleep well for a couple of days afterward, though I never told my dispatcher why. I've run it probably 30 times since, and nothing has happened on it again, not once. No strange voices, no vanished tail lights, no dome light turning itself on in the dark. I never found out whose truck that was, or what happened to whoever left that cab running with the seat pushed all the way back. I checked local news for the following weeks, half expecting some story about an abandoned vehicle recovered off I-70, and found nothing that matched. No report, no follow-up, nothing at all. I looked, for a while, at drivers' missing boards online too, scrolling through profile after profile of men and women who never made it to their next stop. Nothing that ever matched. Some nights, running that same flat, boring stretch, radio on, scan out of old habit, I still think about that empty seat, pushed all the way back, waiting for somebody who wasn't coming back to it. I was 3 weeks out of my training program, first solo run without a trainer in the passenger seat, and I was nervous about basically everything that night, which I think matters here because it meant I was paying very close attention to every little detail, way more than I normally would have on a routine overnight. I'd graduated my program with decent marks and felt reasonably confident behind the wheel by that point. But there's a real difference between driving with a trainer 6 feet away and driving completely alone for the first time. And I felt that difference sitting in my chest the whole first day out. Dispatch had me on a rural route through farm country, delivering to a distribution center that didn't open until 6 in the morning, so I had to park overnight somewhere along the way and roll in early to make my window. I found a gravel pull-off other drivers had mentioned online as fine to use. Nothing official, just a wide shoulder off a county road. A couple of trucks already parked there when I arrived, which made me feel better about the spot. Before I settled in for the night, an older driver in the rig next to mine knocked on my window, friendly enough, and gave me one piece of advice completely unprompted. He said, "If you hear knocking on the trailer tonight, don't get out to check it. Whatever it is, it'll stop on its own." I laughed, figured he was hazing the new guy, the way older drivers sometimes do, thanked him, and climbed into my cab for the night. Everything was quiet for the first couple of hours. I actually managed to fall asleep for a stretch, which honestly surprised me given how wound up I'd been all evening. I woke up to a knocking sound, 3 slow knocks, coming from somewhere on my trailer, toward the back end of it. I remembered what the older driver had said, and just lay there, telling myself it was probably a loose strap flapping in the wind, or a low branch scraping against the side panel. Something completely explainable that I'd feel silly about come morning. The knocking stopped after those 3, and about 20 minutes went by with nothing. Then it started again, except this time, it wasn't 3 knocks. It was a slow, steady rhythm, evenly spaced, going on for almost a full minute before it stopped. Straps don't knock like that. Wind doesn't knock like that. Not with that kind of even spacing. That's when I actually started to feel scared, instead of just curious about it. I checked my mirrors, both sides, trying to see whatever part of the trailer I could from the cab. Nothing visibly wrong that I could make out in the dark. No strap hanging loose. No obvious cause I could point to. I told myself maybe it was one of the other parked trucks. Sound carrying strangely in the flat, open country, the way it sometimes does. And for a minute, that explanation almost held. Then, I noticed the wind had actually died down completely, sometime in the last hour. I could see it in how still the grass along the shoulder had gone. Not even a light rustle. Which meant whatever was making that rhythm wasn't wind-driven at all. And that thought alone undid the explanation I'd just built for myself. I also considered briefly that it might be an animal, a raccoon or possum climbing along the underside of the trailer, the way they sometimes do around parked rigs looking for warmth. But the sound was too high up, too evenly spaced, too deliberate for anything with 4 legs and no plan. The knocking started a 3rd time, and this time it moved, slowly, along the length of the trailer, from back to front, like something was walking alongside it in step, and tapping as it went. I counted the intervals without meaning to, the way your brain locks onto a rhythm when it's scared. 4 knocks. A pause about the length of 2 full breaths. 4 more knocks, moving forward the whole time. I sat completely still in my seat with the doors locked and did not get out, no matter how badly some part of me wanted to know what it actually was. At one point, the knocking reached the front of the trailer, right where it connects to the cab, close enough that I felt it as much as heard it, a faint vibration through the floor of my own seat. And then it simply stopped, mid-rhythm, cutting off in the middle of what should have been the next knock. I sat frozen for a long stretch after that, waiting for it to start again. But it didn't. Not for a while. The knocking eventually resumed once more, and then stopped for good sometime before dawn, though I honestly couldn't tell you the exact moment, because exhaustion must have finally won out, and I dozed off at some point during it without meaning to. In the morning, I got out and checked the whole trailer, every panel, every strap, walked the entire length of it twice. Nothing wrong anywhere. No dents, no scrape marks, nothing loose that could explain what I'd heard. The older driver from the night before was already gone, pulled out before I even woke up. I never got his name, never saw him again at any stop I've used since, and I still don't know what I would have found if I'd actually gotten out to check that first night. I finished my delivery on time, told my dispatcher nothing about it, and for a long time afterward, chalked the whole thing up to first-run nerves playing tricks on a tired brain. It's been almost 4 years since that night, and I've used that same pull-off maybe a dozen times since, without a single repeat of it. But I still keep the doors locked a little more deliberately than I probably need to whenever I park there. And I've never once been tempted to test what would happen if I got out. This is the one that still gets to me the most, and it happened almost 2 years ago now, when I was running team with another driver on a route that had a switching off behind the wheel every few hours. One of us driving, while the other slept in the back, almost never fully stopped except for fuel and food the whole run. Team driving is its own kind of strange, honestly, even without anything supernatural involved. You spend days at a time in a space smaller than most bathrooms with another person, trading off sleep and wheel time in a rhythm that starts to feel less like a schedule and more like breathing after a while. R and I had been running together for close to a year by that point, knew each other's habits, knew when to talk and when to just let the miles pass in silence. My co-driver, I'll just call him R, had done this specific route dozens of times over the years, knew every stretch of it by feel, and about 18 hours into a run that was going to take us close to 30 hours total, he mentioned something offhand while I was taking over the wheel from him. He said there was one particular stretch, a long empty section of interstate through some genuinely nowhere country, where he always kept both hands on the wheel, no exceptions, no matter how tired he was or how much he needed to rub his eyes. I asked why, half joking, and he just said, "You'll feel it when we get there. Keep driving. Don't slow down for anything that isn't a real hazard." Then he went back to the sleeper without explaining any further, like the sentence was the whole answer. I laughed it off at the time. Every driver's got a stretch of road they don't like for their own reasons. Construction history, a bad accident they witnessed once. Nothing supernatural about most of it. But R fell asleep in the back not long after, and I kept driving through the evening into full dark. Radio low, coffee going cold in the cup holder, and eventually I came to the stretch he must have meant. I don't know exactly how I knew it was the one, but I did, immediately, before he'd ever given me a mile marker or a landmark to watch for. The road just felt different, quieter somehow, even with the engine running and the tires humming under me at 70 miles an hour like always. About 10 minutes into that stretch, I saw a figure standing on the shoulder up ahead, lit up clearly by my headlights well before I got close. Just standing there, not walking, not waving for help the way a stranded motorist would, arms at its sides, facing the road. I slowed instinctively. Every instinct in you says, slow down for a pedestrian that close to the highway. But I remembered what R had said and kept my speed steady instead, hands tight on the wheel. As I passed, I looked, just for a second. The way you can't help but look, no matter how much you tell yourself not to. It was a person-shaped outline. I want to be clear, I never saw a face, never saw any real features, just a silhouette, standing far closer to the actual roadway than any sane person would ever stand. Close enough that my mirror should have shown it clipping past, inches from the trailer as I went by. It didn't move as I passed, didn't turn its head to watch me go, just stood there, facing forward, like it had been facing that exact direction long before I ever arrived, and would keep facing it long after I was gone. I checked my mirrors obsessively for the next several minutes, and the figure never appeared in them. Not once. Not walking away down the shoulder. Not standing where I'd left it. Nothing. Just gone from view the instant I was past it. Like the mirror simply didn't register that it had ever existed at all. I ran through it the way I run through everything. Out loud, quiet, mostly to keep my own hand steady on the wheel. Could have been a road sign, some reflective marker catching the headlights at a strange angle and my tired brain filling in a shape that wasn't there. Could have been a mile marker post with brush caught around it, the wind moving the brush just enough to read as motion, or the absence of motion, either way. Could have been a jogger, somebody training at night in dark clothes, standing still to let a truck pass safely rather than risk the shoulder while it went by, which is actually the smart thing to do. I gave each one a real chance. None of them explained the mirrors. A road sign doesn't disappear from a mirror. A jogger doesn't disappear from a mirror. Whatever was standing there should have been visible, receding, for a good 10 or 15 seconds minimum at highway speed. And it just wasn't. I also thought, for a moment, about pulling over, just to prove to myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, that there was nothing actually back there, and I could get out and look at the empty shoulder and laugh about it later. R's voice from earlier stopped me every time that thought came up. Don't slow down for anything that isn't a real hazard. I decided, somewhere in that stretch of quiet highway, that I trusted a decade of his experience over one anxious minute of my own, and I kept my foot steady on the pedal. About 5 minutes further down that stretch, my CB, which had been dead silent for hours by then, no other traffic, no chatter, nothing, crackled once, and a voice, flat and completely unhurried, said a single sentence. "You didn't stop. Good." Then nothing else. No matter how many times I tried to raise whoever it was afterward. I did not wake R up. I don't know why exactly, except that some part of me didn't want to have that conversation at 70 miles an hour in the middle of that particular stretch of road. I kept both hands on the wheel, exactly like he'd told me, didn't touch the radio dial again, didn't slow down for anything else that appeared to be standing near the shoulder. And there were two more, further along, spaced out at what felt like deliberate distance, both of them just standing, facing the road, neither one appearing in my mirrors afterward either. The second one was closer to the roadway than the first had been, close enough that for one full second I was certain my side mirror was going to clip it, and I actually flinched, my hands tightening hard on the wheel, waiting for an impact that never came. The third one, the last one, was standing in a shallow ditch just off the shoulder, low enough that only the top half of it was visible above the grade, and it was the only one of the three that seemed, for just a moment, to turn its head very slightly as I passed. Not toward me exactly, more like it was tracking something behind me, something I couldn't see and didn't want to. By that point, I'd stopped trying to explain any of it to myself. There's a point on a night like that where the logic just runs out, where you've tested every reasonable idea and none of them hold, and all that's left is doing what you were told to do and getting through it. So that's what I did. I kept both hands on the wheel, kept my speed steady, and didn't look in the mirror again until the road started to feel normal. When we finally cleared that stretch, the road just felt normal again, the same way it had felt different going in. Some shift I couldn't have put into words in the moment, but was completely unmistakable all the same. R woke up about 40 minutes later, right around our next shift change, and the first thing he said, before I'd told him anything at all about the last hour, was, "You saw them, didn't you?" I asked how many people usually see something out there. He said it depends on the night, and some drivers run that stretch their entire career and never see a single thing, and some see it every single time without fail. He wouldn't tell me which kind he was. We've run that route together twice more since that night. I've seen the figures both times. He's told me, both times, that he didn't see anything at all. I've stopped asking him why he keeps both hands on the wheel through that stretch if there's genuinely nothing there for him to see, because I don't think either of us actually wants an honest answer to that question at 70 miles an hour in the dark. We're still running team together now, still take that route a handful of times a year, and it's become one of those things neither of us talks about outside of the drive itself. When we come up on that stretch, one of us just says quietly, "Hands on the wheel," and the other one does, and neither of us has to explain what we mean by it anymore. I mostly run regional freight now, shorter hauls, home most nights, but for about 2 years I did a route that had me passing a particular way station late at night, well after it closed for the day. No staff on site, gates up, the whole facility sitting dark against the tree line. This was a route I'd picked up specifically because it paid a little better than my usual regional runs, hauling produce mostly, refrigerated trailers that needed to keep moving on a tight schedule to make delivery windows before the load spoiled. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and after almost 2 years on it, I knew every mile marker, every gas station, every quirk of that stretch of highway, the way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. I could have told you, without looking, exactly which mile the road surface got a little rougher, exactly where the tree line pulled back to reveal open farmland for about a 1/4 mile before closing in again. Way stations that are closed don't require you to stop, obviously. You just drive past the dark building, the empty scale, and keep going without a second thought. I'd done this specific route probably 200 times over the years, without ever giving that station a moment's consideration. One night, running maybe an hour later than usual because of a delayed pickup earlier in the day, I approached the way station and the lights were on. All of them. The building lit up, the overhead lane lights active, the sign flipped over to open, exactly like it would look during regular business hours. I hadn't heard anything from dispatch or from other drivers about a schedule change, but a lit-up way station isn't inherently strange on its own. Sometimes they run night operations for specific enforcement pushes around holidays. So I pulled in and rolled toward the scale the way I was supposed to. There was no attendant visible in the booth. The booth itself was lit, chair pushed in neatly, computer screen glowing with what looked like an active login screen, waiting for input. But nobody sitting there. I told myself the attendant had probably just stepped away, maybe to the restroom, maybe out to check a truck in the inspection bay I couldn't see from where I sat, and settled in to wait it out, figuring they'd be back any second. I sat on the scale for a minute, engine idling, waiting for someone to come out or speak over the intercom the way they normally would. Nothing happened. I got on my CB and tried to raise dispatch. Got nothing but static back, which struck me as strange in itself, because I'd had perfectly clear reception the whole route up to that exact point. I noticed too that the digital readout on the scale itself, the one that's supposed to show your weight the second you roll onto it, was frozen on a string of zeros. Not blank, not off, just sitting there, displaying a number that couldn't possibly be right for a fully loaded rig. I told myself the sensor was probably down for maintenance. Same as everything else that night seemed to have some easy explanation waiting for it if I looked hard enough. I sat there for probably 3 full minutes, weighing my options, And then, over the way station's own outdoor speaker, the one they usually use to tell you to proceed or pull into inspection, a voice came through. And it wasn't giving instructions. It was just breathing. Slow, even, unmistakably a live open mic, and not some equipment malfunction. I said hello into my own CB, more out of pure instinct than any real thought that it would help. The breathing stopped immediately, like whatever it was had heard me say it. The breathing had a texture to it that I still notice sometimes in ordinary background noise, months later. A slight catch in it every few seconds, like whatever was breathing was doing it deliberately, rather than automatically. The way a person breathes when they're trying to stay quiet, rather than the way anyone breathes when they're simply alone. I did not wait around for permission to proceed. I pulled off the scale and got back onto the highway, checking my mirrors the entire way out, half expecting to see the lights follow me somehow, or the gate come down behind me before I cleared it. Nothing chased me. The lights just stayed on behind me, shrinking steadily in my mirror until I rounded a bend and lost sight of the building completely. And even after that, I kept glancing at that mirror every few seconds for a couple more miles, just to be sure. I called it in to my dispatcher the next day, mentioned the after-hours lights, half expecting her to tell me they'd quietly started running night operations again. She checked and told me instead that the station had been fully decommissioned almost a year earlier. No equipment left running, no staff assigned, no power even connected to the building anymore, sitting there, pending demolition. I asked if she was completely sure. She said the paperwork on it was very clear, and asked me, a little pointedly, why I wanted to know. I still run past that spot sometimes now, on a different route. The building's gone entirely these days, actually torn down a while back. Just an empty lot with cracked pavement where the scale used to sit. I still slow down a little every single time I pass it, out of a habit I can't quite manage to shake, even though there's genuinely nothing there anymore for me to see. I asked my dispatcher once, a while after that night, whether she'd ever heard anything odd about that particular station from other drivers on the route. She said no, not really, but admitted the decommissioning had happened faster and quieter than most of the ones she'd seen in her years doing scheduling, almost like someone wanted it shut down and gone without a lot of paperwork trailing behind it. She didn't have a theory. Neither do I. Part of the job. The part where you're basically done for the week and just waiting on your next truck assignment. I drove for a smaller regional company, and drivers coming off long routes sometimes had to bunk overnight at the terminal, in a little dorm building out back, before getting picked up or reassigned to a new truck the following morning. Nothing fancy. Shared rooms, thin walls, the kind of setup where you end up hearing basically everything happening in the room next to yours, whether you want to or not. The terminal itself was nothing special. A fenced lot for trucks, a small office building, and out back that dorm, which had probably been built sometime in the 80s and hadn't been renovated much since. Worn carpet, fluorescent lighting in the hallway that buzzed audibly, a shared bathroom at the end of each hall. Most drivers avoided staying there if they could help it, preferring a motel on their own dime. But the company covered the dorm for free, and after a long week, I usually just wanted a bed, any bed, and didn't think twice about which one. The rooms themselves were small, just a bed, a nightstand, a window that didn't open more than a few inches for safety, and those thin walls I mentioned, the kind that made you very aware of your neighbours, whether you wanted to be or not. I got in late one night, exhausted from a long stretch, and the dorm was fuller than usual. Some kind of scheduling backup, meaning more drivers than normal were staying over that particular week. I got a room to myself that night, which was normal for me, and went straight to sleep without much thought about it. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because I could hear someone in the room next to mine, clear as anything through the thin wall between us, talking. Just one voice, low, steady, like they were on a phone call with somebody. Except, every so often, it would pause in a way that made it sound less like an ordinary phone call, and more like they were actually listening to someone respond on the other end. And there was never a second voice audible at all. Just the pauses, exactly the right length for a real conversation, and then the one voice picking back up again. I lay there and listened longer than I probably should have, partly because I couldn't place who was even supposed to be in that room. I hadn't seen anyone go in earlier that evening. I told myself a few things to stay calm. Maybe someone had checked in late, after I'd already gone to sleep, and I just missed hearing them arrive. Maybe it genuinely was a phone call. Video chat, maybe, with the other person's voice just too quiet to carry through the wall the way the near voice was. Maybe I was half asleep, and my brain was stitching ordinary mumbling into something that sounded more structured than it actually was. None of that explained the timing of the pauses, though. I found myself counting them without meaning to, the way you count anything that scares you. And they weren't random. Every pause ran close to 4 or 5 seconds, consistent, over and over, the exact rhythm of someone listening to a real reply and then responding to it. Around what I'd guess was 2 or 3 in the morning, the voice said something I heard clearly enough through the wall that it stopped me cold. He's right next door. Should I get him? Followed by one of those same listening pauses. Then, after a moment, okay, not yet then. The voice kept going after that, quieter, more clipped, like the conversation had shifted to something it didn't want overheard, though I couldn't make out actual words anymore, just the low rise and fall of it continuing on the other side of that thin wall, for what felt like another hour at least. I did not sleep again that night, not even close. I sat up with the room light on until it was bright enough outside to feel like a normal morning again, and then I went and knocked on the door of the room next to mine, telling myself the whole walk over that I'd probably feel stupid for having been scared, that it was almost certainly just some guy on a late call with his wife about something completely mundane. Nobody answered. I found the dorm supervisor a little while later and asked who'd been assigned to that room the night before. He checked the log and told me it had been empty the entire night, no driver assigned to it at all, and honestly, hadn't been used in almost a week. General maintenance backlog on that particular unit. I told him I'd heard someone talking in there for hours straight. He didn't seem especially surprised by that, exactly. Just tired, and said that room got reported sometimes, and that they'd been meaning to look into it eventually, and then changed the subject to ask if I wanted a cup of coffee before I headed out. I never stayed in that dorm building again after that. I request a motel voucher now whenever I'm coming off a route that would otherwise put me there overnight, and my company stopped asking me why at this point, which honestly tells me I'm probably not the only driver who's ever asked for the same thing. A couple of the older drivers I've mentioned it to, carefully, just nod along like it's not news to them. And one of them told me flatly that he stopped staying there years before I even started with the company, for reasons he never fully explained, and I never fully pushed him to. I don't know who or what was in that room that night, or where it went when it wasn't talking, or why it knew exactly which door I was sleeping behind. I just know I haven't set foot back in that building since, and I don't plan to. That's 7 for tonight. If you've ever driven at night, on any road, for any reason, you already know some of this doesn't need much explaining, and some of it probably never will get one. Every driver I've talked to about this stuff over the years has their own version of these stories, their own stretch of highway they don't like, their own rest stop they avoid, without ever quite saying why out loud to a dispatcher who'd just ask questions they don't want to answer. Thanks for keeping me company for a bit while I get more of this build finished up. If you're new here, stick around. There's more of these coming most weeks. Drive safe out there tonight, whatever that ends up meaning for you, wherever you're headed. And if you're driving right now, listening to this, keep both hands where you can feel them. I've still got a good stretch of road left before I turn in myself, so I think I'll just keep going for a while longer. Same as always.